Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the seventh and last Agro Lunch and Learn webinar of 2025. This webinar series is made possible through the generous support of Eurofin's AgroScience Services, and we sincerely appreciate their sponsorship. Now, before we dive into our talk, I want to take a moment to talk about something that makes webinars like this possible, our Agro Division community. If you're not already a member, I'd strongly encourage you to join. Membership is the best way to stay at the forefront of the field, expand your professional network, and directly support the groundbreaking science you see right here. You can add Agro to your ACS membership or join as an affiliate for just $16 a year. It's a fantastic way to invest in your career and our scientific community. Simply visit agrodiv.org and click Become a Member. And a few quick updates. We do have several important award nomination opportunities coming up for worthy scientists. And all the details, deadlines, and contacts are on the screen now. Mark your calendars for the next ACS Fall National Meeting in Chicago next August. Calls for symposia are now due tomorrow. Please reach out to Dina Barrett for any questions. Lastly, the Agro Division is committed to building future-ready resources and engaging our members. We need your help to continue to grow and succeed. Please visit agrodiv.org to learn more and get involved. Just a quick note on our format today. Please use the Q&A tool to submit your questions, and we'll be sure to address them at the end of the presentation. And while you're listening, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you work and what you do. We'd love to hear from you. And also a quick word on ACS community standards. We want to ensure a safe, collegial, and positive environment for everyone. The full text is displayed on your screen, but the main takeaway is simple. Please keep all interactions professional and respectful. This is especially important for the chat and the Q&A tools. Any behavior that is harassing, threatening, or discriminatory is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Thank you for helping us create a great experience for all our participants. Now I'd like to introduce Gary Patterson. He's the historian for the American Chemical Society HIST Division. I should have said there. He's a professor emeritus at Carnegie Mellon University. He's written over 100 articles and is a fellow of the American Physical Society and a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry. And he's written a book, Physical Chemistry of Macromolecules, and he attained his PhD in physical chemistry from Stanford University. And now I'll hand that over to Gary.
Thank you. So it's always a pleasure to work with the Agro Division because they appreciate the history to provide the context for the present. They appreciate the fact that chemistry is their road to the future. And they're interested in sustainability because they want there to be a future. So fortunately today we have two wonderful speakers. One of them is one of the two most famous American chemical historians, Larry Principe. And you'll enjoy his seminar. Not only does he know chemistry, he has a PhD in chemistry. He's the professor of humanities at Johns Hopkins. He's a person who appreciates that humans are the ones who actually do all this and provides real context. So I'm not going to take any more of his time. Larry, take it over.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for the invitation to speak to you all today. So let me just work my sharing here. Good. So I'm going to talk today about the discovery of phosphorus, the secrecy that surrounded it, and this concept of chemical exotica. So I'm going to start with a rather famous painting. Excuse me, there we are. This painting called The Discovery of Phosphorus. It's a late 18th century painting by Joseph Wright of Derby, which shows an imagined view of the discovery of white phosphorus. The painting is famous for its display of and use of light and color. What I'm going to do today is four things in the brief order. I want to talk about the discovery of phosphorus. I want to talk particularly about the characters involved in the story, because as Gary said, it's human beings that actually do science, so we need to know about the characters. I also want to talk about the character of chemical knowledge in the 17th century, and that includes the idea of secrecy, the idea of discovery, and this concept that I'm calling chemical exotica. What on earth does that mean? And then finally, talk a little bit about the role of experience in experiment, especially in productive processes. But first, just a few things, a few facts about phosphorus. I'm going to be talking about white phosphorus, the white allotropic form of the element phosphorus. It's a waxy, low melting point solid. I don't know how many of you have actually had direct contact with it. I confess that as a high school student, I used to play with it in my parents' basement, and I still have all my fingers and toes, actually. But it is stored underwater because of its intense flammability. Its kindling temperature is so low, and I'll come back to this in a bit, that it even has to be cut underwater. Cutting it outside of water will often make it ignite spontaneously. It smokes in the presence of oxygen and glows as well. And of course, it is also highly toxic, so it's a dangerous substance to deal with. Joseph Wright of Derby's painting is in one way very imaginary, because although white phosphorus was originally produced by very, very high temperature distillation by the reduction of phosphates, of course, it wouldn't glow in the receiver as it comes over, because that would require some oxygen, and the phosphorus would have burst into flames. At any rate, had there been any oxygen there, and you wouldn't have actually got to produce any. All right, so let's talk about an early history of phosphorus. The early history is actually shrouded in a bit of mystery. Around 1669, a person working in Hamburg by the name of Hennig Brandt, about whom we know virtually nothing, seems to have taken a large quantity of urine, of human urine, boiled it down, mixed it with, we're not quite sure what, and submitted it to high temperature distillation in a sealed vessel. And so was the first to produce white phosphorus, the isolated element. What happened after that is he seems to have sold the secret of his preparation to a number of people. One was to Johann Daniel Kraft. I don't have a picture of him to show you. And from Kraft, it passed to two much more famous people. One of them, at the top there, you see, is Johann Kunkel, who was in Berlin, and the other, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, in Hanover. Now, Kraft himself started to publicize a bit of the phosphorus. He took a trip to England and visited Robert Boyle and the Royal Society of London, where he displayed samples of phosphorus. We don't know whether he was actually able to make it himself or whether he got it from Brandt or Kunkel. We're not quite sure. But what did they do with it? They played with it. They would stick their fingers in it and write on pieces of paper to show glowing letters. They would, even horrific as it sounds, rub some on their faces so their faces would glow in the dark. Anyway, phosphorus became a famous substance, something that I'm calling a chemical exotic. That is, it's something that doesn't actually have a commercial or other economic value, but it's of interest only because it's weird. It's exciting. It's different from everything else. And there's a lot of secrecy involved with it. People did not know how to prepare it. I've just mentioned the first four people, who knew about the preparation: Brandt, Kraft, Kunkel, and Leibniz. But throughout the 1670s and 1680s, there were fervent attempts to try and discover the secret of how to make white phosphorus. And that's a story in itself, for which I have to introduce another character. And this is Wilhelm, later known as Guillaume Humbert, one of the most remarkable chemists of the late 17th and early 18th century. Remarkable first because he was born in Java in 1653. He was educated first as a lawyer in Jena and Leipzig, but perhaps to his parents' chagrin, his first job was in Magdeburg, where he came under the influence of the then mayor, Otto von Guericke, about whom you may have heard because of his invention of the air pump and his interest in natural philosophy. Apparently, Otto von Guericke took a liking to the young Homberg, and shared with him some of his secrets of mechanical devices and of natural philosophical discoveries. And so Homberg gives up the practice of the law and starts on learned travels, starting in 1678. And he spends much of the next 13 years of his life traveling all around Europe, doing what? Learning about scientific and manufacturing secrets. And how does he do that? By starting with one secret that Guericke gave him and trading it for a next one, meeting the next important person on his route, getting a letter of introduction to the next, to the next, to the next, and so forth. So by the end of his career, by the end of his travels, he's admitted to the Parisian Royal Academy of Sciences, the best job you could have in Europe at the time, and eventually becomes the most prominent, most famous chemist in Europe. And it's quite sad we don't have his name on our lips nowadays, but in a moment of entirely grotesque self-promotion, I'll mention that I've written a book about him and his work. So, what does Homberg do first? Well, he first leaves to go to Italy, where he tries to find the secret of the Bologna stone, which is the first artificially prepared, persistently luminescent material. It's a native barium sulfide barate naturally doped with trace copper. This was another huge chemical exotica of the period, because even though the recipe for making it and where to find the stone was published repeatedly, nobody could get it to work outside of Bologna. And I'll come back to that. But Homberg goes to Bologna, and he becomes the most efficient producer of the Bologna stone of the period. It sets him on a lifetime interest in the interaction between light and matter, where light can be absorbed by matter and then re-emitted. Absolutely fascinating story there that I don't have time to get into. But he hears about what while he's in Italy? He hears that there's some guy in Berlin by the name of Kunkel who has a new glowing substance, white phosphorus. So he goes to Berlin in 1678 or 79, the timing isn't quite sure. He meets Kunkel, and he and Kunkel sit side by side at the furnace and make white phosphorus. And so Homberg becomes the fifth person in history to know the secret. Well, Kunkel doesn't just give secrets away. How at this time, secrets are valuable objects of trade. You want more secrets? Well, you need a secret to trade for a secret. And we actually know what Homberg gave him. Otto von Guericke had invented an interesting kind of barometer that nobody knew how it worked because the mechanism was hidden. Von Guericke gave that secret to Homberg. Homberg gave it to Kunkel, and in return, Kunkel showed him how to make white phosphorus. What's he do next? Homberg goes to Hanover, meets Leibniz. Why does he want to meet Leibniz? Well, because Leibniz is a famous person at this point. He gets Leibniz to write him a letter of introduction to the Royal Society of London. And Leibniz writes, Mr. Homberg is not only very skilled in matters of mechanics and natural philosophy, but is also extremely intelligent. He also has the glowing phosphorus. And so Homberg takes this letter with him to England, meets the Royal Society of London, and meets its shining star of the time, Robert Boyle, whom Kraft had visited 3 years earlier and shown him white phosphorus. And for the past 3 years, Boyle has been trying to figure out, how the heck do I make this stuff? It's just so interesting. And Boyle does lots of experiments, can't get it to work. Interestingly, shortly after Homberg is in England, suddenly Boyle succeeds. We don't have any direct information, but I think it's very clear that Homberg gave Boyle the instructions he needed to know how to make white phosphorus. And again, it was a trade for a secret, because I found in Homberg's papers an alchemical recipe that is connected only to Boyle. Boyle was the only person with this recipe. So how did Homberg get it? He must have traded something to Boyle for it, And my guess is it's the phosphorus. The timing works out perfectly. Boyle then publishes this book called the Aerial Noctiluca, that is the shining substance, in 1680, right after Homberg leaves England. He does another thing. He puts into the Royal Society's treasury a sealed paper with the recipe. You can see in the picture here the wax seals. This was not opened until after Boyle's death. Now, why would Boyle have done this? Why didn't Boyle just publish how you make phosphorus? Well, simply because Boyle knew the traditions of chemistry at the period. He had gotten the secret of phosphorus by trading a secret. That means that secret was not his to give out. He had to protect the secrecy and the identity of the person from whom he got it. And so when he writes the Noctiluca, he says that he got it from a learned and ingenious stranger, and he gives 3 initials, countryman to Mr. Kraft, in other words, a German, who had newly made an excursion into England to see the country. Now, for years, historians have believed that AGMD was Ambrose Godfrey Hankowitz, one of Boyle's assistants. I'll come back to Godfrey Hankowitz in a few minutes, but that can't be true because Hankowitz did not make an excursion into England to see the country. He was a refugee, a Protestant refugee from Germany with no money. And Boyle says that after he learned the secret of the phosphorus, this person who gave him the secret left the country, which Godfrey Hankowitz never did. So I think this is a misdirect in Boyle's writings to protect the source of the knowledge. All right, what does Homberg do next? Royal Society is a nice place, but what's the best place in the world if you want to get a career? The Royal Academy of Sciences in Paris. The Royal Academy, that is. The Royal Academy was funded by King Louis XIV. Everyone got stipends, so that's great. Royal Society of London was a different story. The only thing King Charles ever gave the Royal Society of London was a goose at Christmas time, whereas Louis XIV was very prodigal with money, and he was collecting the best scientists from around Europe in Paris at the Academy. Well, what does Homberg find when he gets to Paris? He meets this man, probably the chief chemist of the Academy of Sciences, Duclos, and he finds that there's a great stage prepared for his showmanship with the secret of phosphorus, because for the previous 2 years, Duclos has been trying unsuccessfully to make phosphorus. There are all sorts of recipes being sent around. Duclos collects them. What he has to do is, in order to get enough starting material, he sets up a public latrine on the Rue de Seine to collect urine, and collects about 400 pints of it every few days that he carries back to his laboratory to boil down. You can imagine what that must have smelled like. But none of these recipes work. He is able to buy some pre-prepared phosphorus. We're not quite sure where he gets it from, maybe from Boyle, who was successful this time, or from Kunkel. We don't really know. But once again, what does the Academy do with it? They essentially play with it. And that causes a number of misfortunes. 2 academicians try rubbing it on a hat to make the hat glow, and they accidentally set their bed on fire. The astronomer Jean-Dominique Cassini, who's been invited there from Italy, puts some of it in a handkerchief, puts it in his pocket. It spontaneously ignites. He gets it out of his pocket. He tries to stamp on it with his shoe. It burns a hole through his shoe. He then tries to put it out with a copper ruler. And for the next several months, the copper ruler glows in the dark. So they can't get it to work either. Well, here comes Mr. Homberg. And Homberg arrives in Paris late 1682, stage perfectly set for displaying his secrets, and he displays them time after time, but he never gives them the secret of how to prepare it. They know it's made from urine, they know it's made at high temperatures, but there's something they're just not getting right. Homburg is not going to give away the secret unless he gets something in return. This is the economy of chemical knowledge in the 17th century. So, what does he do? Sorry, let me go back a moment. He doesn't get admitted to the academy the way he wants because of political reasons. It's only about 9 years later, after more travels around Europe, he's invited back to Paris and made a member of the academy. And what does he do then? In November 1691, the first thing that he does is share with them the secret of making phosphorus. Once again, it's a trade. He gets to be a member of the academy. They get to learn how to make phosphorus. And here I'm showing you the Mémoire de mathématiques et de physique, in which it was published in April of 1692. And there's his article as it was published in 1692, where he even mentions that nobody else can get it to work. Well, why? This gets us to the issue of experience. Homburg was the only person who sat together with Kunkel, the other person who knew how to do the process, and did it with him. That ability to be present at the preparation seems to be made all the difference. The same thing happened with the Bologna stone. He went to Bologna, he found someone who knew how to make it, and then he was able to do so. So there's this direct personal contact that's so important for these chemical exotica. And that's one reason they're so valuable. You really have to be in the know to figure out how to make them. Before I conclude, I'm going to go back to one more person, Ambros Godfrey Hankwitz. Homburg went on to do dozens and dozens of other things in Paris. Hankwitz, on the other hand, made a career, made his fortune out of making white phosphorus. He learned how to do it from Boyle's lab, and then he took up the process himself. He happened to live in poor rate lodgings with his wife and children, the eldest of whom he named Boyle Godfrey after his mentor Boyle. He lived next to a hospital where he had regular supplies of urine and feces because he discovered he could make the process work better if he boiled down the urine to a syrup, mixed it with fresh human excrement, rolled it up into little balls, set it out in the sun to dry, and then put those dried balls of urine and excrement into a retort and heated the heck out of it to make phosphorus. Then he would take the phosphorus, which had to be distilled into water, melt it in hot water, and then squeeze it with his bare hands through leather to purify it. And he made a fortune doing this and selling it. And so it no longer was a chemical exotica after it became commercially available. But I just want you to think about two things as I conclude. Think about his poor wife and children sitting in the poor rate, probably one-room lodging, while the husband was distilling urine and dried feces and making phosphorus, probably right next to their kitchen stove. He did make enough money that he founded a pharmaceutical and chemical preparations company, which passed to his son, thence to his grandson, and actually remained in business until it was shut down after the inflation of World War I in 1918. So that brings us down to the 20th century and also to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Now, we don't have any questions in the question box yet. I'll make a few remarks, but while I see some hands going up, please put the questions in the question box. It's said of science that it's a disease, but that you have to catch it from somebody who's got it. And it's true.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my infector was Paul Flory. And of course, Larry had a good infector as well.
Yeah, and it is this personal contact. We tend even when we're teaching it to our students, to think of science as this disembodied process. But no, it's a social process. It's a process that goes on between human beings, and with all the pluses and minuses that ordinarily go with human interactions.
Yeah, it's a deep understanding that chemistry is a human science as well as a physical science.
Yeah.
And the study of the chemists teaches you just as much as the study of the atoms and molecules.
Yeah, in many ways. My students laugh at me when I tell them that when I say that, well, look, chemistry, it's the most sensual of the sciences. And it really is, because it's about so much about qualities. And these chemical exotica became so popular because they had weird sensory properties. They glowed in the dark, they exploded, they caught on fire. And that's what garnered the attention for them.
So we're now getting a few questions. Nick Cherevsky, who's the former program chair of HIST, said, has anyone attempted to reproduce the recipe for phosphorin from urim in the present?
Well, it was done for a long while after the time of Boyle and Hankwitz through the 18th and 19th century, until bone dust replaced urine. I don't know of anyone who's tried to do it. I've often wanted to. I'm a bit afraid of doing so because obviously we would need an earthenware retort and very high temperatures, and there is considerable danger involved in it. Maybe in my retirement, I will set up a furnace in my backyard and try it again. But hitherto, I don't know of anyone who's tried it. Someone tried to commission me to do it, and I demurred at that possibility.
If you're looking for great furnaces, the name is Peter Oakley. He's at the College of Arts in London, and he's produced furnaces for couples that go to the right temperature, 900 and something centigrade. So yeah, Peter Oakley is your guy.
Okay.
Okay. Jeffrey Price, I may have missed it, but did you reveal why the bologna stone would only be prepared in Bologna? It's in the book. Look it up.
and read the article that I mentioned there. Yeah. The problem is that it has to be in order to be persistently luminescent, you have to have doping. So some samples of Bologna stone that you pick up actually have the requisite amount of copper. But many of them don't, because it's extremely local. It's a matter of a few meters here or there, whether or not there's copper in the natural occurring material. What Homberg learned, what he discovered actually on his own later, was that if you just take the stone and before you prepare it, you grind it in a bronze mortar, the glow is much more intense because he's literally doping it
with copper.
With the copper. And a lot other people, we're probably grinding it in an iron mortar, and iron is a luminescence poison. So that even if you had the right amount of copper, if you grind it in iron, it's not going to work.
So our next speaker is Jim Jenkins, who's an active agro-scientist and is really interested in sustainability. He's got a great talk. I don't want to take time away from him, but he's an example of what it means to belong to agro. Jim, take it away.
Thank you, sir. Well, good morning, everyone. I appreciate your interest and time taken to learn more about an important chemical issue that affects us all. Let me introduce to you one of the most paradoxical elements on Earth, phosphorus, element 15 on the periodic table. On one hand, it's the angel of life itself, a vital component in every living cell and the powerhouse behind fertilizers that feed our growing global population. Without it, no modern agriculture, it would collapse. On the other hand, it can be the devil element that catches fire in its pure state and wreaks havoc on ecosystems, polluting waterways, and triggering toxic algal blooms. Angel or devil? This is the question I invite you to explore with me today. Now, on Earth at least, phosphorus is present in the phosphate form, And 95% of the phosphate produced today is tied up in growing food. So you can see its importance. And it's appropriate that I tell this story through the lens of the evolving phosphate fertilizer and agricultural landscape. The phosphate picture is rapidly shifting from quiet agricultural input to a strategic resource in limited supply. Designated a critical mineral in several countries and essential to food security, it is paramount that we extend the life of this important resource, use what we have much more wisely than we have been, and reduce its waste and pollution footprint. Adopting circular economy practices is a great fit for moving us towards these goals. So I'm going to feature a combination of strategies, resource recovery, and product examples to indicate what a circular phosphorus world is beginning to look like. By the end of this session, you will be able to name at least 5 key challenges facing the phosphate industry and 5 examples of how we're transitioning to a more sustainable world. So before we begin, I want to check in that we all have a common understanding about circular economy. It's a model that promotes waste and pollution minimization, longer product and material life cycles, and regeneration of nature and natural systems like the planetary phosphorus cycle we're talking about today. Looking at the diagram on the left, what that means is when we make a product, the materials that come in at the top, we want to minimize the amount of them, make the product last longer through its use cycle, and be much more effective so that you don't need to use as much. And at the end of its usable life, instead of throwing it into the waste bin or landfill, it's rebuilt, reassembled or disassembled, and recovered back into use. So let's start by taking a quick look at the current state of raw material supply and phosphate production. Most phosphate raw material comes from sedimentary reserves created millions of years ago from plant and animal remains that were caught in shallow seabeds. To a lesser extent, igneous phosphate deposits formed by crystallization as molten lava cooled. In these both environments, calcium combined with the phosphate to form calcium phosphate apatite, shown the formula at the bottom of the screen. It came in 3 colors: fluoro, chloro, or hydroxy form. Now, as you can see on the map, the reserve locations are spread very unevenly across the globe, where 5 countries control 85% of the reserves. They have control of this. That's creating a lot of have and have not countries. Because phosphate is a non-renewable resource, the critical question on everyone's mind should be, how many years do we have left of usable reserves given the current consumption and expected use increase over the next quarter century? Well, the answer may shock you. In 2023, analysis commissioned by the International Fertilizer Association confirmed a lifetime estimate of, here it is, 300 years plus or minus. Now, that doesn't feel like a really long time for me, although it'll be past my lifetime. There are significant reserves of lower quality rock, but they are not currently viable. And this is one of the first challenges. Companies are developing advanced extraction technologies to improve their ability to process some of this rock in a cost-effective manner. But our first challenge is clear. How do we find the means to maintain the volume of usable phosphate resources, because they are so important, by orders of magnitude beyond the 300 years? So now let's move on to how to turn phosphate rock into monoammonium phosphate. The formula of rock is on the left. The formula for monoammonium phosphate is on the right, but it's not a straight line to get there. It takes many steps and considerable energy, equipment, and materials. I'm going to break this process down very simply for you, and I'll run you through it. First, you have the rock that's extracted. The rock goes into a phosphoric acid plant. Sulfuric acid is added to the phosphoric acid plant to digest the rock. Out of the phosphoric acid plant becomes phosphoric acid. You move that into a pipe reactor. You need an ammonia plant to supply the ammonia in, and you react the two together to make a slurry of ammonium phosphate. So it's not quite there yet. You pump that over to a granulator. You granulate it into typically looking fertilizer pills, which are about 2 millimeters in diameter. And there you have the monoammonium phosphate, otherwise known as MAP. So there are many challenges represented on the sustainability sense in this slide, but I'd like to circle back to the 5 tons of phosgypsum waste that's also created in that phosphoric acid plant. 5 tons of gypsum comes from making 1 ton of acid. So I think we need to take a closer look at that. Phosgypsum waste reframed as a resource. So for decades, phosgypsum has been designated as a hazardous waste with nowhere to go. So it just sits in giant stacks next to the production plant, part of the devil in phosphorus. As you see here, that's a portion of a stack. These things cover multiple city blocks. But recently, something has changed. The world is waking up to the reality that many critical materials are non-renewable and in short supply, just like phosphate. And that presents an exciting opportunity for the phosphate industry. A 2025 report earlier this year, strategic report came out on phosgypsum called From Waste to Inventory. That has reframed gypsum into a resource opportunity that includes quite a number of case studies worth investigating. To 1, mine the stacks for rare earth and critical metals recovery, use the bulk material for land reclamation fill or concrete and construction materials, to name a few. And all of those are actually in use to some degree today, either in a pilot or in some countries like China, full bore into industry. Now, this is classic circular economy thinking, making a resource something out of what's previously called the waste. And this thinking is what could change everything for the phosphate business, as far as reducing environmental impact and creating new economic opportunities. Now, the experts are thinking phosgypsum is a potential secondary raw material business. Aha. Now, I'm going to switch to, let's look at some of the examples of phosphate product innovation. This first example speaks to the limited phosphate resource challenge. Typical municipal wastewater and sewage treatment plant inflows contain a sufficient amount of nitrogen and phosphate levels for recovery. If you add magnesium to the waste stream, that combines with the nitrogen, and phosphate pulls it all out into a Principe to make magnesium ammonium phosphate. This compound is also known as Struvite, and it just happens to be a slow release fertilizer. Aha! Now, Struvite is not exactly a new compound. It was first encountered as a material buildup problem in water treatment pipes around 1930, and that was happening just naturally. Now it's captured in a crystallizer within the treatment facility and introduced back into agricultural use. The technology has taken a big jump in Europe and continues to grow across the globe as a means of recovering up to 99% of the phosphate in those waste sources. And at this day and age, the total global struvite capture is about 40,000 tons from an estimated 100 units across the planet. Now, to a fertilizer person, 40,000 tons is actually quite small when you're talking about the consumption of 50,000 tons of P2O5, 50 million tons of P2O5 a year in the planet. However, it's got this going for it. The technology is in place. The product works very fine as a fertilizer. It doesn't require much additional equipment, and the pollution reduction value is significant in terms of freshwater quality and algal bloom control. Now, as a footnote to phos recovery sources, I just want to mention that in comparison to municipal waste, animal manure is a much bigger prize that could theoretically match the yearly production from phosphate rock alone. The catch is the logistics with manure, its variability from one farm to the next, and its cost challenges of handling are significant to overcome. We don't have the time today to go through the manure story because that's a whole book unto itself, but I do have a slide in the extras at the back section of my talk with a bit of more information on how what the issues are, if there is time to go through it. Next example. The second product example I'd like to mention is an alumina phosphate substrate called rhizosorb, so named after the rhizosphere, which is the region of soil in the vicinity of plant roots in which the chemistry, microbiology is influenced by their growth, respiration, and nutrient exchange process. The technology was developed at Penn State University and licensed by a company called Phospholutions, Inc. Alumina is activated by charging it with phosphoric acid in the manufacturing process. Then the rhizosorb is then applied to the soil along with traditional phosphate products. And the alumina substrate protects the phosphate from fixation into the soil by random calcium ions, which is the arrow to your left pointing down. This is a terrible problem for soluble fertilizer, especially phos. Once you put it on the soil as a nice soluble material and hope that the plants take it up, if the plants don't get it to it quickly, it'll get fixated in the soil and it's not lost, but it sits there for years. So this is a major problem solved with this rhizosorb product to protect those phosphate ions so that the plant can take them up. Now, when the plant is ready, phosphate release from the substrate is triggered by formation of a chemical concentration gradient near the plant root in the rhizosphere. The value of this is an increased phosphorus uptake efficiency of 50% in comparison to MAP. That is tremendous. That means less phos fertilizer is needed, which lowers the cost for the farmer to achieve the same or greater crop yields. Because the phos substrate will recharge with phosphate ions from the MAP fertilizer that's already in the soil, the product provides protection from fixation for up to 120 days. And that covers the full typical life growth span of many crops. Comparatively, carbon emissions during the manufacture are found to be 45% lowered by using less carbon intensive ingredients of the product that you add. So this example has a lot of things going for it from a sustainability perspective and a value perspective to the farmer, because he doesn't need as much and less of his less of his money is spent on totally soluble phosphate that gets tied up. So our next solution is a what I call a chemical plant in a granule. Phosphol LLC is the company, little company in US. And why I really like this one is it's a combination of phosphate rock, some sulfur, and amorphous silicon, all ground up and packed into a granule that basically skips the traditional phosphate chemical manufacture and all that energy and equipment intensity that I showed you in slide 4. This granule is a biochemical factory in a little granule that you can put directly into the field. Now, how does it work? The sulfur includes microbial activation, or induces microbial activation to create a calcium sink around the root, and it lowers the pH of the soil, to slowly dissolve the rock phosphate into plant available form. This slow release significantly reduces the phosphate leaching into water sources, if there's too much rain, for example. And this product also has several improved environmental impact reduction advantages. Because it's everything all in a granule, you essentially bypass the phosphate production plant that I showed the picture of earlier. And this equates to an 80% reduction of product carbon footprint. Now, that is something in the sustainability world, because we always hear about big companies achieving a 5 or a 10% reduction in, say, their use of plastic, or even their reduction in carbon footprint. This is significant. Also, the product resists nutrient leaching, and that's the way that most of the phosphate is lost in the agricultural world. Heavy rains or too close to rivers or things like that, and it gets washed away. This particular fossil product that contains silica, which also promotes the regeneration of soil. And one last good thing, this is the winner of the 2024 EPA Green Chemistry Challenge Award. So these examples I show you are particularly targeted towards interesting chemistry, most of which used to happen in a phosphate plant to make soluble fertilizers. Now there's a lot of really interesting chemistry going on at the soil level between the fertilizer and the plant. Now, extras. Please don't read this. I don't want you to go cross-eyed. Before I close, I wanted to let you know that I've compiled this listing of the challenges and matching opportunities we've discussed for your reference and feedback. I won't go through this today for time reasons, but I am happy to send the full presentation to you and continue the conversation outside this session. If you're interested, connect with me through LinkedIn. So, what is the sustainable path forward? I'd like to leave you with this message. We are at the defining moment in our phosphate story. The challenges are many, but they all have solutions. To answer the question I've posed in the beginning, phosphorus is neither angel nor devil. It's been a reflection of how we've chosen to manage it up to now, and we need to change that. The old story must change, and the examples I've shown you here today represent a more promising future with circular thinking as a guiding approach where scarcity drives innovation, waste turns into resource, and stewardship intent drives responsible action. Phosphorus will shape our future by how we choose to store it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. That was spectacular. And we immediately have the question, what about the runoff? Is there a way to catch the agricultural runoff that does not enter wastewater treatment channels or finally, produce algal blooms in every lake in America?
Yes, Well, both of the two products that I showed at the end, they protect the phosphate, because in a soluble phosphate product, you lay it on, and if it rains, if there's heavy rain, it all washes into the soil and it's gone in a day or two. Poof. However, if you protect that phosphate from not all dissolving all at once, like the phosphate rock example does, you dissolve a little bit at a time, and that's the advantage of the slow release. You're metering the phosphate as the plant needs it, and the plant tells you it needs it because it sends out chemicals through its root system to say, okay, I need to start pulling in some phosphate or nitrogen. So that's one example. There is another process or a strategy that I didn't mention here. It's called the 4Rs. That is also very effective at reducing runoff. It's right place, right time, right amount, and right, I think, crop is the other one. So what that means is, over time, we've gained a lot of agronomic knowledge to be able to pinpoint how much fertilizer a farmer needs to put on and when he needs to put it on to make more use of it and not have a big reserve that just gets washed away.
Okay, the next question is, why is Morocco so rich in phosphorus on a worldwide level?
Good question. Now, if I can go back to the map.
It was 70%.
Yes. Let me see if I can find the map. Can you guys see my slides again?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
There you are.
Okay. So the map, if you notice, if you just draw a little arc across the top of Africa, all the way around, that's where all the animals were, or most of the animals were, and the plants, when it was a shallow sea. So if you look at all the maps, almost all locations that are on dry land today used to be shallow seas. They're all at the edges of the continents. And the top of Africa was in particular quite rich. Now, I don't know why Morocco is so high. Actually, I do. Because what the Moroccans do, they take sand from the Western Sahara. And the Western Sahara used to be a shallow seabed, believe it or not. And so all that sand, because it's so dry, all that phosphate has just been sitting there for centuries and centuries and centuries. And so now somebody discovered it, and they've got something like a 50-mile belt line that pulls the Western Sahara sand out to the edge, the seacoast in Morocco, where all the production plants are. That was a good question.
And in the U.S., it looks like it's Utah or something like that.
It's down in Florida. The entire spit of Florida used to be a shallow sea.
Yeah.
And that the Florida, you'll notice the number of the U.S. is 1.4%. Florida has been going a long time, and that is an issue because Florida has, I think, about 40 years left of its mineral. The other dot that you see just above the little label, that's actually, yes, it's Utah. So just north of Salt Lake.
Yeah, I should have worn my cap. I have a cap of the company in Utah called Azomite.
Okay.
And that's probably what you're talking about.
Jim, is there anything we can learn from other extractive industries that can inform us on how to deal with sustainability issues in phosphorus?
Yes, there definitely is. I touched on that briefly in the beginning, where there's a lot of extractive industries. Mining is pretty much the same thing. So what they've pulled away from copper mining and even iron mining and some semi-precious metals iron mining is they're looking into flotation, and so getting the right mix to pull out more of the mineral you're after and separating the slag, which would be clay or other minerals that you're just not interested in. So flotation is actually a new alchemy. It's so complicated because you can have 5 different components in 100 different concentrations to get just the right mix that separates those. And one thing I didn't mention, each one of those dots, every time you start buying rock from a new site or new mine somewhere in the world, you have to totally retune your plant because the chemistry is, in a general sense, all the same, but in a specific sense, it's wildly different. If you have 0.5% of higher aluminum content in the rock from Togo, for example, and you're used to running Florida, Texas Gulf rock, you're going to spend half a year trying to get your plant working well again. So, to answer the question, flotation, and there's a lot of benefaction methodologies as well. That is the best way to get more of the iron, more of the metal out, or the mineral out, and leave less behind.
So we have a question in the Q&A. When does phosphorus in the manufacturing process turn into dangerous elemental phosphorus?
As long as it's in the phosphate, it doesn't, except, it doesn't turn back into phosphorus, but it's pretty darn dangerous in the phosphoric acid plant, because it's not just one big bucket and it's all in there, although it's very caustic. It chews metal like crazy, and you have to wear a lot of equipment in there because right in the heart of it, there's a lot of fumes and things like that. So from a personal protection perspective, it's pretty nasty. I'd say that would be the heart of the devil in that fat manufacturing process.
Right. And this is why we link these two talks together. It's because it's so elusive and so dangerous at the same time that we have a wild past and a wild future ahead of us.
Well,
right, I would say there's not a whole lot of elemental phosphorus as the issue. It's gaseous forms, like the gaseous form of phosphoric acid, that can be very dangerous in the plant. So the secret to a lot of this is called chemical engineering. And chemical engineers need to get serious about not just doing gas phase stuff, but solution stuff, solid stuff. They're up to it.
Yeah, that's right. I used to say there's the first 4 chapters of Cotton and Wilkinson inorganic chemistry packed in that phosphorus acid plant in that one spot. So that was my epiphany when I first joined the business.
Great. Well, Gary, I think, do we have any more questions? Either from you or Larry?
Oh, I was just a comment was for Jim, that I noticed that in the wastewater recovery, I am assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, that the ammonium and the phosphate are coming out of excrement.
Yes.
Right. So essentially, we're getting the phosphorus from the same place that Hamburg and Kraft and all the rest and Boyle actually got it from the human waste products.
Yeah, it's full waste.
Yeah,
that's exactly. So essentially, in a broad sense, we're taking the phosphate where nature put it into these shallow seabed reserves, and we're putting it into humans, in plants, and in animals. So we are the new phosphate reserves.
Yeah,
that's going to be unlocking the problem that we're facing.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like the Matrix. All right. Well, I'm going to share our conclusion slide here. Yeah, again, thank you again to Larry and to Jim and to Gary for their participation today and for excellent presentations. And to our tech host, Kyle Sawyer, who's been with us for a number of years. And to Eurofins Agroscience Services for their generous sponsorship. So we'll be posting answers to any unanswered questions and as a part of a follow-up email that will also include a brief survey. Now, join our 2026 webinar series. We plan on starting that back up in March of next year. We are planning content and continuing our HIST Division co-programming for ACS's 150th anniversary, if you can believe that. And we are seeking new sponsors for this webinar series in 2026 as well. So please contact Andy Newcomb for sponsorship information and to sponsor for next year. So to join the webinar committee altogether, please email me. And I thank you all for your participation today, and we hope to see you next year.